What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Top 8 Bracket Reveal Show for the Players Tour Finals. Really exciting stuff here. We're going to be revealing all of the matches and breaking down the matchups and who we think is going to win each and every single one of them, which players have the best chance to win the whole thing with a great cast of experts. And don't worry, if you didn't catch the action last weekend through the Swiss portion of the tournament, we'll be catching you all up and sharing with you some of the most exciting moments and highlights of that tournament. My name's Maria Bartholdi, and I'm joined here by Cedric Phillips. We've got Paul Cheon from Wizards of the Coast, who'll be joining us in just a little bit, as well as Marshall Sutcliffe, play-by-play extraordinaire, coming up later to break down all of the matches for us. But Cedric, just in case people didn't catch the tournament last weekend, or even if they did, for you, what were some of the biggest takeaways of the Players Tour Finals Swiss rounds?
Well, it was a tournament headlined by beat 'em or join 'em. You want to play Wilderness Reclamation or don't you? And a little over half the people in the tournament said, yeah, I want to do that. And a little bit less said no. And you know what happened? Half of the top 8 is Wilderness Reclamation and half of it isn't. So who was right, who was wrong? I don't know. It's tough to say. But if you show up to this tournament, like so many did, and say, you know what, I want to cast Growth Spiral, I want to cast Wilderness Reclamation, no one's going to argue against you because that combination of cards is so powerful. But for those who took the plunge and decided, you know what, I don't want to do that, it worked out pretty well for them as well. So what I take away from those 2 days of competition as a whole is you can win without Wilderness Reclamation in your deck. It's tough, but it can be done.
Let's find out what the Day 2 metagame breakdown looked like for that tournament, by the way, just to kind of get a bigger picture and story of the tournament. Cedric, what does this say to you here?
What this says to me, of course, is you're seeing the conversion rates, you're seeing how many, day 1, day 2 percentages, all this other stuff. I mean, the reclamation strategies were very powerful. They were very dominant. And, if I look at decks that did not fare so well, hello, Bant Ramp, not so much. So for you Bant fans out there, Hydroid Crisis and company, not exactly where you want to be, but reclamation continues to be where you want to be. And these other sacrifice strategies, though we do have one of the top 8, those are just okay right now. But you can find ways around the edges to beat these reclamation strategies. But at the end of the day, Maria, everybody knew that reclamation decks were going to be the decks to be going in. Maybe even more people playing that strategy than was expected, and it performed well.
Let's take a look at the win rates now of the top decks of the tournament here. You can see that 4-color Reclamation, thumbs up, did a great job here with their match win rate. The creature decks didn't fare so well, but we do have 2 decks that I want to point out as breakout decks of the tournament, Mardu Winota and Mono Black Aggro. Cedric.
And you take a look at those columns, count 1 for each. Match win rate percentage, 76.9%. That's notable. Both of those decks are in the top 8, and we will get to those shortly over the course of this show. But I do want to take a look at Team of Reclamation, that count of 57 players, 52.2 match win percentage, and then 4-color Reclamation, a little bit less players in 22, but a higher match win rate percentage in 54.5%. So those Reclamation strategies, they are as good as advertised. And for those mono-colored aggressive strategies, mono green and mono white, which of course I'm a fan of both, bit of a frowny face there. Those decks did not perform as well as maybe some players were hoping or expecting. It's a Growth Spiral world, and some of us are trying to not live in it, like Mardu Winota and Mono Black Aggro.
I love it. Well, that's a look at the larger tournament, but now we're going to focus in on the top 8 and look at the bracket here for our top 8. And you might be saying to yourself, hold up, there's no names in that. That's right, because we're going to be revealing all of the quarterfinals matchups as we continue on through the show. And you can see their upper bracket and lower bracket. That's because this is a double elimination top 8. And by the time we get to the grand finals, of course, it's going to be best 2 out of 3 matches. So a little bit different than we're used to here for this kind of tournament. But that's our bracket, and it's going to be time to fill it in here. But first, we've got to add Paul Cheon into the conversation here to get talking about our first quarterfinal matchup. Let's reveal that right now here. Quarterfinal number 1 for the Players Tour Final, Ben Whites versus Christopher Larson. Ben Whites versus Christopher Larson. Let's get to meet these players a little bit better. Ben Whites, what a nice guy. I really love this guy. A+, winner of GP Phoenix, that's how he qualified for this tournament, playing a really cool mono-red Eldrazi deck in Pioneer when it was Inverter's tournament left and right. He's like, no, I'm playing mono-red Eldrazi. It was pretty cool. He's top 8'd a ton of Grand Prix, but he's never had a top finish. He wants to take this thing down. Cedric, let's talk about his road to the top 8.
His road was a fun one here, folks. On day number 1, Ben faced 7 different archetypes. And of course, when you're playing a deck like 4-color Reclamation, when Team of Reclamation and other decks were an option, perhaps you may doubt yourself in your deck selection. But after day number 1, especially after defeating Thiago Saporito to close out his day, he had to be feeling good. But again, 7 different archetypes in day number 1. Day 2, a little bit different. 7 Reclamation decks in day number 2. And he went win, 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 win. Lose, win, win. So a very, very good day for him. He played 4-color Reclamation because it is the best deck against opposing Reclamation strategies, or at least that's what they tell me. And it certainly did work out here for Ben Whites, a friend of mine and someone who wanted to accomplish 2 things in Magic. 1, win a Grand Prix, which he did, and 2, make the top 8 of a Players Tour event, which he's just done. So congratulations to him.
He had a bit of a sweat in round number 14, the last round of the tournament versus Andrew Beckstrom. It was a win and in for Ben. Let's watch it happen.
Must block.
Beckstrom in a lot of trouble. I mean, he has to deal with both of these threats. He's got the Teferi, but remember, Kenrith, I mean, even if you bounce it, you can just replay it and give it haste.
That's right, and if you bounce Uro, similar can happen depending on the graveyard situation. This is getting very tight here for Andrew Beckstrom, down a game to Ben Whites. Ben is the one who's in position to make top 8 with a victory here, though. Ben came into the round at 10-3, where Beckstrom was at 9-4.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, Ben has a Teferi on 3 in play, so he can use the Teferi to get this to Uro off the battlefield.
That's right. Beckstrom's at 6, but he's going to give the good game, and Ben Whites is going to pick up that top 8 here. He's going to improve to 11-3 using the same list that Andrew Beckstrom did, and of course they played against each other in the last round. That's just how Magic goes sometimes.
So that is Ben locking up his spot in this top 8. But of course, he needs an opponent. So let's get to know Christopher Larson a little bit better. From Denmark, you might call him the Great Dane, playing Jund Sacrifice. Did I just give him that nickname, or has other people already called him that? I don't know. Christopher Larson says, when I add counter spells to my deck, I win a lot less. So, you know, why not play Jund Sacrifice? Paul, why don't you walk us through his road to the top 8?
Yeah, so Chris Larson choosing to play something a little bit different in Jund Sacrifice, and it really paying off here in the early rounds. He got to play against Azorius Control, Mono Black Aggro, and Esper mid-range, so a lot of these decks that were maybe targeting other decks, and Jund Sacrifice really does well against those decks. But additionally, he was able to pick up a win against Team of Reclamation against Antoine Lagarde and Akira Asahara. So really, really great start to the event, 6-1 finish. However, day 2, I'm gonna say, might have been a roller coaster of emotions for him, because imagine starting out day 1 6-1, but then starting out 0-3 day 2, losing to Dominic Gertson, Raphael Levy, and Sam Sherman. So things are going to be really, really tough for him. You know, really good shot that he might have not even made the top 8, but then rattled off 4 straight wins, and especially in that last round against Pyotr Glogovsky, you know, down a match in what was perceived to be a poor matchup, mulliganing to 5 game 2, and then still coming out on top and being the only player to make top 8 with a 10-4 record.
Yeah, you might call it a little bit of an ice cream day for Christopher Larson, a rocky road, if you will, but we're going to watch him lock things up here versus Pyotr Glogovsky. Check it out.
He did find a Witch's Oven under it as well, so he'll continue to go and add permanents to his board. Is it enough already? Return to Nature. He can cast that too and use the...
Exile card from a graveyard.
That is not out of permanent, unfortunately for him, but yeah, get Uro out of here.
Oh, is that enough?
That's enough. That's plenty
enough. Mayhem Devil, that's gonna do it. Wow.
Unbelievable stuff from Christopher Larson, continuing to run out cards, and he gives him the good game. Larson gives him a little taste.
Give out beats, you gotta be willing to take them too. So
you gotta take the beats yourself, and that's gonna do it. Christopher Larson wins an unlikely 2-1 there. That mulligan to 5. Boy, he won't forget that game anytime soon, and finds the victory.
I love the good game there to the Emote King himself, Canister. Let's take a look at Ben White's deck here. 4-color Reclamation. Cedric, talk me through how this deck does what it does.
Well, this is a Reclamation strategy through and through, so some of these cards aren't going to surprise you. Wilderness Reclamation, Shark Typhoon, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, of course, Expansion Explosion, main deck copies of Mystical Dispute in a metagame that is expected to have plenty of Wilderness Reclamation and Growth Spirals. 4 of that card, of course, here as well. But these white cards, Teferi Time Rattler, Dovin's Veto, and you'll find Kenrith blooming in the sideboard as well. That's what the splash is for. 30 lands is quite a few, but given that some of these lands do cycle, Blast Zone has additional text outside of tapping for mana. That's what this deck is all about. Your goal is to get an edge in the Reclamation Mirror, and clearly that has worked here for Ben White.
Christopher Larson's deck into this top 8. Jund Sacrifice. Now, Sacrifice decks on the whole didn't have a great weekend, Paul, but tell me how this deck can win.
Well, I mean, this deck is the ultimate grind you out deck. This deck is full of cards that give you card advantage over time. You see Trail of Crumbs, you see Corvold, Fakers King, Solemn Simulacre, and Bolas of Citadel. So, this deck is really, really good against everything else in the field, except probably Temur Reclamation. But what this deck is looking to do is just play a bunch of value-based creatures, get to that late game, and finish off opponents with either a gigantic Corvold, either through Corvold itself, or all the cards that you get from playing Corvold Faker's King, or Bolas of Citadel.
Cedric, I want to know from this 4-color rec deck, what tools do you think it has specifically to beat Jund in this matchup?
I wouldn't say that it so much has one specific tool, though I will note that Dovin's Veto is a good card in this matchup because it can counter Trail of Crumbs, it can counter Bolas' Citadel, and some of the spells that kind of show up in the matchup. What it does have is power level. And power level is a thing that really is hard to quantify, but you know that it's there. Look, this deck is still a Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation, Expansion Explosion deck. At the end of the day, that's the most powerful thing to be doing in the format. Doesn't mean you can't poke a hole in that, of course, but is it incredibly powerful? Yes, it is. And that's where I think Ben White gets this advantage. He likes to play this kind of deck, and Magic in general. He likes to take a very proactive approach. He's going to have to do that here. He doesn't want to be too reactive, and this deck is an incredibly powerful deck when it is being proactive. 30 lands is a lot. Is there a chance that he may Mana Flood? Yeah, there is. But at the same time, some of those lands cycle, some of those lands are temples, and once you have all those lands in combination with Wilderness Reclamation, Explosion's probably going to wrap it up. So it'll be close, but that's what this deck really does and why it's so powerful in the format.
Yeah, Paul, this is a great question because Jund didn't end up doing too well overall in the tournament. And in fact, Christopher Larson had a 5-3 record versus Reclamation decks in the tournament. So can Jund Sacrifice hang in this matchup, or is it just dead in the water?
I mean, it certainly has a chance. I mean, Chris Larson went 5-3 against various Reclamation decks in the tournament. So it means that he still has a configuration that can beat it. I think he's really going to have to dig deep in his sideboard for those options. He has lots of ways to interact with Wilderness Reclamation. He's got 4 copies of Agonizing Remorse in the sideboard, which are basically cards that allow him to interact. But yes, game 1 is going to be tough. And frankly, the Jund Sacrifice deck is just very bad at applying pressure. It's really good at drawing cards, but it's not really attacking for a whole lot in the early game, which means that it's going to set up Ben to basically allow him to establish his 1-2 punch of Wilderness Reclamation Explosion. And that basically can just beat any game plan, really, that the Jund Sacrifice deck is trying to muster up.
All right, well, it's time to make our predictions. Cedric, who do you like in this matchup?
It's a close one. These are 2 players that I have played, shoulder to shoulder with at various events. I've teamed with Ben Weiss at Grand Prix Detroit last year, and that was a very enjoyable experience. This is a really, really big accomplishment for both of them, but this is something that Ben has been looking to accomplish for a very long time. Maria, you talked about that Grand Prix win that he had with Mono Red Eldrazi. That was the first thing he wanted to check off his bucket list. The second one was making a top finish and a Players Tour top 8, and I don't think it ends here. I think it's close. I think it's very, very close, but I think ultimately he's able to run away with this one. I think it'll probably go the finale, but I think Ben White moves on past Christopher Larson, which should be a pretty entertaining set of games.
How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Cedric here. I think just in terms of overall game plan, the Temur or 4-color Reclamation variants just had the superior game plan, right? The Jund Sacrifice deck is really good at eking out incremental card advantage. But then the Wilderness Reclamation deck goes, oh, Explosion, you're for 5. All those 2-for-1s that you got, completely irrelevant, right? So I think, in order for Chris Larson to actually have a chance, he does need to try and resolve his heavy hitters. We've seen him close the door with cards like Bolas' Citadel, and that's probably the most important card in this matchup.
Awesome. So that is a look at quarterfinal number 1. We're going to say bye to Paul here and welcome Marshall in to the conversation as we head to quarterfinal number 2. Hi, Marshall. Let's reveal our second quarterfinal now here for the Players Tour final. Check it out. Patrick Fernandez versus Christoph Prince. And this should be a really exciting match in our finals here. Let's get to meet the players a little bit better. Patrick Fernandez versus Christoph Prince. As you can see, Patrick playing Teamer Reclamation, Christoph playing 4-color Reclamation. Basically, the battle of the tournament. Who brought the better Reclamation deck might be decided in this quarterfinal. Patrick Fernandez from Brazil. He was on the Brazil World Magic Cup team in 2016 and was their national champion last year. Cedric is going to walk us through his road to the top 8.
An interesting road it has been for Patrick Fernandez, who's kind of, I don't want to say new to the competitive Magic scene, but this is the big top finish. Someone who clearly loves playing a lot of Magic, and this is a big deal for him. It's a big deal, of course, for all of our players in the top 8, but he, I think, had the biggest smile because he's like, I can't believe I got here, and it was a road to get here. 5-2 through day number 1, so feeling good after day 1, especially after beating losing to Michael Jacob, who's in the top 8, but beating some nice name players in day number 1 like Ken Yukihiro. But it's that day 2 where things got a little bit more interesting for our team of Reclamation player. Starts off with a handful of wins, and by a handful I mean 5 in a row. Once you kind of get that snowball going, right, you get that first win, you get that second win, you get that third win, you're thinking, okay, maybe I can actually do this thing, and all of a sudden you're shaking hands virtually with Alan Wu and you're saying, I'm in the top 8. 6-0 versus Reclamation strategies in this tournament so far. That is notable. 6-0 against the most powerful card and most powerful deck in the format. Can he do it again? We'll see. This one's pretty tough.
Yeah, and he's already beat Christoph Prince once, so can he do it again? A little info about Christoph Prince here was our lone undefeated player going into day number 2. Went 10-0 in Pioneer at Players Tour Brussels, playing Inverter Combo to qualify for this tournament. He says what this tournament means to him is, playing Magic is fun and winning money is nice. So hopefully he'll be able to do some of that coming up tomorrow. Marshall, talk me through his road to the top 8.
Well, as you mentioned, Maria, he was the only undefeated player. All wins on the board coming out of day number 1 with this 4-color Reclamation deck, clearly designed to take aim at the regular Teamer Reclamation decks. And as we look at the day 2, the only losses they're very few and far between. One of them notably was to his opponent, Patrick Fernandez, here in this opening match, and then an easy draw in after a couple of wins. And then it did start to get a little shaky down the stretch, as you can see, a few losses to Patrick and then Pyotr Glogowski, but still with that really strong day 1 run, able to finish up with a draw. Christoph also succeeded in his goal of trying to build a deck that could defeat other Teamer Reclamation players, going 7-2 overall against Teamer Reclamation against Reclamation decks in general, and 6-1 against Teamer.
Yeah, he had an amazing start to the tournament. We're going to watch a clip of him here now, going 8-0.
See, Mystical Dispute, we can copy, expand some stuff, we can Dovin's Veto any of their counters. I mean, it's just gonna get countered anyway, Teferi. Teferi doesn't like anyone playing.
Exactly. I mean, what we're going to see, I think, is just a baby explosion. Yeah, to just get... Because, I mean, those Wilderness Reclamations untapping, he could probably draw like 8 or 9 cards. I don't even think I can do the math of how much mana he's going to have to funnel into that Sailor. So you got to deal with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So no counter.
Pretty much lock it up.
Just going to kill it. And we are going to see our undefeated player, Christoph Prince, maintain that undefeated record here at the Players Tour.
So an awesome run to the tournament there for Christoph Prince. Let's take a look now at the decks these players are playing and talk about how they're going to fare in our matchup. We're going to start things off with Teamer Reclamation, basically the deck of the minute, Cedric.
Oh, I've never seen this before. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so Shark Typhoon, Wilderness Reclamation. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Little Growth Spiral. I've heard that one's pretty good. Yeah, this was the deck of the tournament. I think Marshall, Paul, who we had earlier, got to see plenty of this over the 2 days that they did coverage. Main deck copy of Commence the Endgame does give you a slight edge against these Wilderness Reclamation strategies, but that was also starting to become commonplace, so players were actually preparing for that in some fashion. That's why you see main deck copies of Brazen Borrow, but more importantly, copies of Petty Theft. Mystical Dispute has become industry standard as a 4 of, and then those 2 copies of Ether does. So this list doesn't really show any real surprises. Even the main deck Negates, which at the beginning of the tournament may have been a little bit like, oh, really? You think this is what's going on in this tournament? Well, everyone kind of had main deck negates, so no surprises here for Patrick Fernandez, but if it works, and clearly it works.
Let's see Christoph Prince's list here for the top 8, playing 4-color Reclamation. Marshall, add in that color.
That's right. You stretch your mana base into white, which makes your deck a little bit less consistent, perhaps a little more vulnerable to aggressive strategies or more assertive strategies. But for that, you get Teferi Time Raveler, which is one of the best cards against an opposing Wilderness Reclamation deck, regardless of what the build is for it. And you also get access to Dovin's Veto, one of the main 2 on the board here for Christoph. And he said that stopping opponents from resolving a turn 5 Reclamation when they have a dispute as a backup is big. It is a common sequence that you'll see in a matchup like this, and usually the first player to get a Wilderness Reclamation on the battlefield has a massive advantage in the matchup, and you have access to a card that just completely stops them from doing that, even if they have a counterspell at the ready. And Christoph really leaning on the power of these white cards to help break the mirror.
All right, Cedric, Patrick Fernandez here, banking on the fact that you don't need that 4th color to win. Tell me what a win looks like for him with his teamer deck.
Well, here's the big question, right? As we came into this tournament with Reclamation strategies all over the tournament, everybody expected it. Now, 4-color Reclamation cropped up, and Marshall will talk about that in just a second, I'm sure. But we've had some players say, well, if you know how to play Teamer Reclamation, well, you don't need the 4th color. The 4th color is a crutch. You have other people say, yeah, I mean, maybe it's a crutch, but if I resolve Teferi, you can't win, and you don't have that in Teamer Reclamation. On Patrick Fernandez's side, he gets to say, well, I'm 6-0 against Reclamation, so what are you going to say about that? And also, Christopher Prince, I beat you. So, you know, like, you get to do this back and forth conversation, right? You know, Christoph Prince can say that, you know, like, well, I guess you did beat me, but I think I can beat you now that I know what I'm playing against everything else. So we're going to have a fun back and forth because, you know, Christoph Prince, who was dominant this entire tournament, he's got an L. And one of those L's is Patrick Fernandez for this weekend. So who does it favor? I still don't know. Because some players feel like they don't need the 4th color. Some players say the 4th color is very important, and it's kind of a free roll. So it's going to be close, but Patrick Fernandez already beat him once. So how do you pick against the guy that already beat Prince?
I mean, Marshall, this is the real question. Maybe this will decide the argument once and for all, teamer or 4-color. But how crucial is having that Teferi on 3?
It's massive. You know, in my mind, yes, Fernandez did defeat Prince. So in this particular head-to-head, Fernandez holds the 1-0. But if you zoom out a little bit and look at what Christoph Prince did to the other players, Teamer Reclamation, Teamer Rec players, 6-1. That was the only loss. He beat it 6-0 for every other time he faced down Teamer Rec. I feel like he chose the right weapon for the job. This is the matchup that he wanted to have in the top 8, and given that there's only 2 Teamer Reclamation players in the top 8, he got what he wanted.
All right, Cedric, let's put it on the line. Who's going to win?
Well, Patrick Fernandez is already the 1 in 6-1 for Christoph Prince playing against Teamer Reclamation. Oh boy.
6 is a big number.
It's a lot. But he's also beaten Reclamation strategies 6 times. He's 6-0 against Reclamation strategies. I'm going to go with Patrick Fernandez. I am. I don't even have a really good reason as to why, but he's 6-0 against Reclamation strategies. Maybe he knows something that Christoph Prince doesn't. Maybe he knows something that everybody doesn't know about how to play this matchup. I don't know for certain, but he's undefeated against that strategy. He's already beat Prince once. I'm going to pick him to beat Prince again. Moving on.
All right, Marshall, how about you?
So this is a question of if Fernandez is the kryptonite for Prince or if it was an aberration, because the numbers say that Christoph Prince has the advantage in the matchup for this tournament. The question is there something about the way that Fernandez played or his particular build that gave him an advantage, or was it just the way that the match happened to play out? If I zoom out a bit, I have to say I have to favor Christoph here. He went 7-2 against Reclamation decks, 6-1 against Teamer specifically, and I think this is exactly what he was hoping to see when the bracket gets revealed, and I think he's going to feel like he has the best advantage here. He built his deck to beat Teamer Rec, and he gets to play against Teamer Rec. I got to pick him.
Yeah, I'm super excited to find out what actually happens in this matchup in our quarterfinals. All right, we're going to say goodbye to Marshall and welcome Paul back into the conversation here to talk about quarterfinal number 3. What's up, Paul? Let's take a look at our bracket and find out who will be playing whom. That's right, I used whom correctly. Alan Wu versus Michael Jacob here for quarterfinal number 3. Poised to be a really interesting match here. Let's get to meet our players a little bit better before we dive into the decks themselves. There's a look at Alan Wu playing Temur Reclamation and Michael Jacob, the opponent, on Mardu Winota. That's right, you read that right. If you weren't watching last weekend, Michael Jacobs brought a weird one. We'll get into that in a minute. Alan Wu, winner of Pro Tour 25th anniversary, along with his teammates Ben Hull and Greg Orange, says, I always try to make the good plays and not the bad ones. Hey, good strategy. I've interviewed this guy a lot because he is very good at winning Magic. I feel like he constantly is top 8 in Grand Prix. In fact, he's got 4 of them, and he's won 3 of the 4 that he top 8'd. Paul, walk me through his road to the top 8.
Yeah, Alan Wu, I mean, I think just one of the best kind of new generation of players that we've seen. A ton of success recently. Also got to spend a little time on play design, so maybe he got to play with this Wilderness Reclamation card a little bit ahead of time, but that was a long time ago. So taking a look here, I mean, really smooth start to the tournament, right? 6-1 start here. Winning 6 in a row before falling to Christoph Prince on the 4-color Reclamation deck. And when I was looking at the results, I mean, that was a pretty quick loss as well. But yeah, great start to day 1. Moving on to day 2, I mean, I think it seems to me that Alan Wu might have one of the easier, smoothest rides in this event because, I mean, day 2 went 4-1, so he only lost twice. He only lost twice in the entire tournament, and then he just had a double draw in the last 2 rounds in the event to make the top 4. So, you know, Alan Wu is one of those players, very versatile in terms of the decks that he chooses to play. You know, he won Pro Tour 25th anniversary with Death and Taxes, which is a more aggressive strategy. Now you have a more combo-centric deck. As you mentioned before, he just typically plays the best decks and just plays them to perfection.
Yeah, this guy's super smart and super good at Magic. Let's meet his opponent, Michael Jacob, a very popular streamer. I know I've caught his streams quite a number of times, especially back when I was just learning Magic for the first time. He says his favorite Magic memory is winning Team Worlds in 2008 with one Paul Cheon? ?
That may or may not have happened.
That's a fact. I did not know until today, playing Scred Red in that tournament. Cedric, walk me through Michael Jacobs' road to the top 8.
Well, it's an interesting road here for MJ, a man who certainly marches to the beat of his own drum, and certainly a good way as well. You take a look at the top of this tournament, you know, he starts off with a win with his Mardu Winota deck, and you might be thinking, okay, good choice. Then you get a loss, and it's like, okay, well, maybe this was not worth the risk. Maybe I should have just played a Growth Spiral deck, and then he goes win. And now he looks like a genius! 6-1 after day number 1 of competition, beating Ben White, beating Patrick Fernandez, ending his day 1 with a win. Then you go to day number 2 and it's like, okay, well, was day 1 maybe a fluky run that actually picked the right deck? You start day number 2 off with a loss, maybe you get a little scared there, then you go win, then you lose to what's a very difficult matchup in Azorius Control from Raphael Levy. Win draw shows that we have what I would say is our breakout deck of the tournament, our breakout player of the tournament here in Michael Jacob, who again has done some things in constructed Magic with decks of his own design, be it Mono Green in Nationals in 2007, Scred Red in 2008, that Nationals, and of course alongside our Paul there, which is, I'm going to point this way. Yeah, I'm getting pretty good at that. And now Mardu Winota, most people would say Mardon't. Jacob says Mardu.
That's awesome. And we're going to take a look now at why exactly he says Mardu with an awesome Winota turn from round 3.
And there it is. Boom, 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 boom. 4 triggers on Winota. And what can he hit? Well, the triggers are covering up whatever's being hit, but there are things entering the battlefield. And look at this turn from Michael Jacob.
Oh
this has gotten completely out of control. Oh my God, look at that turn. Wow.
Just epic stuff. That's why you play the deck. We're going to take a look at it in just a second in detail. But first, we're going to peek at Alan Wu's deck here, running Temur Reclamation, the deck of the tournament. Paul, anything you want to point out here?
I mean, the only difference so far that we've seen from Alan Wu's list to maybe some of the other Reclamation decks that we've seen is the addition of 2 copies of Nightpack Ambusher. Now, when Alan Wu was interviewed earlier this week by Riley Knight, he was basically saying how in any Temur Reclamation mirror, the entire matchup is predicated on you just playing draw go, and basically Nightpack Ambusher just gives you that added card to have as something that you can set up at the end of your opponent's turn. If there's a counterspell war at the end of turn, you can then untap and resolve a Wilderness Reclamation. Additionally, if people aren't ready for it, guess what? A 4-mana 4/4 flash creature just kind of getting in there is really tough for a lot of aggressive decks to kind of just fight through. So really heads up card, and I think a card that was extremely important for Alan coming into this tournament.
And now the moment we might be waiting for. Michael Jacobs' Mardu Winota list. Take your screenshots now. Cedric, tell me how this deck does its thing.
Well, with all due respect to my good buddy Paul over there, boring. Let's talk about the fun deck.
Come on, man.
Shall we? I know you're doing the best you can over there trying to make Team Erect look fun and interesting. How about those negates? They look pretty bad here, don't they? We're looking at a deck that is all creatures. Winota, we just saw an unbelievable Winota turn. Venerated Loxodon, Judith. I mean, it looks like just this smattering of weird creatures, but Winota forces you to do that because you need a mishmash of non-human and human creatures for its trigger and how that card works. So you can see some incredibly explosive turns with this strategy. Are these numbers perfect? Who knows? They're the numbers that Michael came to for this tournament, and obviously it has worked out well for him because the numbers look all over the place. We haven't even gotten to the sideboard where it's a ton of one-ofs that are just kind of weird cards to play around. Is one General's Enforcer correct? Look, I don't know. I wonder if he smooths out and changes these numbers based off of how this tournament went. Here's what I can tell you. 7-0 versus Reclamation decks. 7-0. And that's what he's about to play against.
So, Paul, the big question now to you is, what can Alan Wu do against a deck that seems to be tuned so perfectly for this metagame?
Yeah, I mean, as Cedric alluded to, this is going to be an extremely tough matchup. Probably the deck he wanted to face the least coming into the top 8. So Alan cannot be happy about this pairing. Typically, a lot of these Reclamation decks are basically built to beat each other. So you've seen people cutting Storm's Wraths from their main deck and all kinds of removal spells for some bounce effects and more proactive creatures. But that's going to hurt here. Alan, I mean, he's got negates that are nearly dead cards. Mystical Dispute's kind of a joke in this matchup as well, so game 1 is going to be extremely difficult. Now, the thing that he has going for him is, well, guess what? He's still playing with the card Growth Spiral. So, for Alan to kind of have a chance, since he's going to go first, he's going to need to have Growth Spiral into Wilderness Reclamation. If he can assemble that combination early and have a little bit of disruption, he might be able to steal game 1.
So, Cedric, my question to you then is, MJ's deck looks awesome. Does it have any weaknesses?
I mean, it has the weakness insofar as power level goes to Alan. Paul mentioned right off the bat, even though I think this matchup is pretty darn bad for Alan, he can still just go Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation into awesome card, you can't keep up because you're playing Raise the Alarm in your deck, right? Like, that's just a real thing that can happen here. Now, on the flip side of things, again, Michael Jacob is 7-0 against Reclamation strategies, and that is telling. But I will peel the layers back a little bit and say this. And when you're playing in Players Tour both days, right, and you get paired against Mardu Winota, and it's an open deck list tournament, you're just going like, well, you have like two minutes to look at the deck list and go like, I guess don't let Winota resolve. I don't know how to play around this deck or these cards. No one tested against this going into that event, and maybe MJ took advantage of that. Maybe the Reclamation players have a better matchup than they think, but they didn't know how to adjust then, and MJ was taking advantage of that. I don't know. The construction of his deck does lead me to believe that with someone who has main deck negates and Mystical Disputes like Paul mentioned, those cards are very bad. So game 1 seems horrible for Alan, but maybe he can turn it around after sideboard. But the thing I come back to, Maria, is again 7-0 against Reclamation strategies. Maybe this is the deck to dethrone Reclamation decks. At the very least, it seems pretty darn good here. It's hard to pick against MJ here, but I'll make my final pick in a moment.
All right, Paul, your prediction.
I'm gonna have to go with MJ. I mean, he literally designed this mismatch of creatures specifically to beat Team Reclamation, and he was extremely successful, you know, choosing to play creatures that are resilient to sweepers. You know, it's gonna be, Alan has to fight through so many different angles of attack here to really have a chance. And really, the only way I think Alan's going to have a reasonable shot to win this matchup is where, you know, he gets kind of the top 10% of his draws, which involves Growth Spiral into Wilderness Reclamation.
All right, Cedric, I feel like I don't know what you're going to say here for your prediction. I don't know, surprise us all.
Well, if Paul wasn't going to go with the person who he won Team Worlds with, I was going to be beside myself. I'm going with my former Stream Team colleague and Michael Jacob, who I haven't got to see that often over the past handful of years. Not sure how much Magic he's playing nowadays, but you know what? He can still cast a spell. He showed that over those 2 days last weekend. I think I think this one's good for him, just because of deck construction, and I think it's going to be good enough. I think it gets a little bit more difficult because Alan probably has a better idea of what's going on now and has the opportunity to like really dig into Michael's deck list, but I still think the cards are the cards, and that game one matchup for Alan is just really, really bad. So give me MJ, but I think it's going to be closer than we think.
All right, MJ to go the distance there in quarterfinal number 3. All right, Paul, we're going to say goodbye to you and welcome Marshall back into the conversation once again here to reveal quarterfinal number 4. So let's take a look. If you know who the top 8 is, you probably already figured it out. That's right, Riku Kumagai versus Raphael Levy. Let's get to meet the players a little bit better. Riku Kumagai versus Raph Levy here in quarterfinal number 4. Riku's playing that mono black aggro deck. Raph playing Azorius Control. Riku Kumagai from Japan loves creature decks, he loves playing aggressive decks, and he loves going to karaoke. So that's how I know he's a Magic player for sure. Cedric, give me his road to the top 8.
Let's take a look at that road to the top 8. It was a darn good start, I'll tell you that much. We're going to take a look at day number 1 here and just see one loss there. Bolded name is Christopher Larson. Bolded name because he is into the top 8. That's how we kind of make that designation. But getting through Sagita's start is always a nice win to have there. And just a lot of wins for the aggressive strategy, rounding it out with a round 7 win against up-and-comer Abe Corrigan. You'll see as we go to rounds, 8 through 14, it was a 9-1 start. Beating Michael Jacob, beating Canister, beating Christoph Prince, and this monocolor strategy, there were a lot of different ones to choose from. Kumagai decided to go with mono black aggro, and it worked out a little bit bumpy in rounds 11 and 12, able to defeat Backstrom very quickly and his 4-color Reclamation deck 2-0. Nice little draw virtually with Patrick Fernandez, and here we are, mono black, not green, not red, not white, into the top 8.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm curious to know how many people would have thought mono black would have gone the distance versus all those other different monocolored decks. Green, which was known a lot better, as was red and white. Well, we're going to take a look here at exactly how he managed to do that. One match in particular where Knight of the Ebon Legion goes the distance.
I don't know if I like the other line that much better either, of just running my Hunted Nightmares into a blast zone that's already on 3. So I kind of see where you're going here, Kumagai.
The best one drop ever. It could go all the way, right?
I mean, I said it would be difficult for it to, but I did not say impossible.
It's a 4/5.
This is incredible. It is lethal next turn, and right now, Beckstrom needs to find some way to deal with it, and he finds Solar Blaze, really?
That is not going to do it. The sizing of the creatures in Riku's deck, Kitesail Freebooter, Knight of the Ebon Legion, Hunted Nightmare. Good luck, Solar Blaze.
How many cards does Beckstrom have in his yard? Not enough. Wow.
Is he just dead?
He's just dead.
He can't even block. He doesn't have enough cards to get back the Uro?
No, he couldn't even fire off the Solar Blaze just to get the Uro live.
Riku has 7 cards in hand.
This is incredible. This Knight of the Ebon Legion actually is going to go the distance.
Oh, you love to see it. I love Knight of the Ebon Legion, one of my favorite cards in Standard. But he needs an opponent, of course, and that opponent is Raphael Levy, the most decorated player in our top 8 here, a member of the Hall of Fame and the MPL. Been playing for 26 years with 4 top finishes, and yeah, that's a lot of lifetime winnings right there. Marshall, tell me about his road to the top 8.
Yeah, he had kind of an interesting one. His day actually started off against his countryman and friend Gabriel Nassif, who actually gave him the deck list just a little before the deck submission time. And of course, they got paired against each other, and then Raphael said, thanks for the list, and beat him. But as you can see, it was actually a rough start for Raph. He was 2-2 after the first 4 rounds, which does not make your confidence that high that you're going to be able to make the top 8 from there. But with 3 wins in a row to finish off day 1, and then another great run in day number 2. Win-win. Sure, there was a loss, but then triple win into a draw. Raph was able to seal the deal, going 1-3-1 versus the Reclamation players, but critically 4-0 versus aggressive decks. And as you can see, the road was tough. Those bolded names are all people in our top 8 that he had to try to play against. Got to draw against Alan Wu and went 2-1 against the other 3 players, but 8-1 after a 2-2 start. Not bad.
Yeah, and if there's something control players love, it's definitely value. So we're going to take a look here at Raph Levy going to Value Town with Yorion versus MJ in round 11.
Raph is a man who is getting all the values out of his card. I watched his match against Christopher Larson, and he is all about getting soaking up every bit of value.
Yeah.
And what he's setting up for right now is an outrageous turn. And I mean, there it is.
That's
but
enough.
Yorion blinking those enchantments and coming in with Archon next turn would have been absolutely insane.
Yeah, Michael Jacob wanted none of that. He saw the writing on the wall as a draft levy, and that is going to do.
I love it. Two great examples of why the people who play these decks love to play them. All right, let's take a closer look at the decks themselves. First up, Riku Kumagai with this mono black aggro list. Cedric, I love it!
I'm sure you do. I mean, I want to give a quick shout out to MJ there for he's just like, you know what, I'm out of here with that classic game. His rap just finished off. He's like, I'm not sitting here for any of this nonsense. Riku Kumagai with mono black aggro. Here's the first thing I want to say about this deck. Rotting Regisaur, nope. Don't need you. Nowhere to be found. Oddly enough, in that clip we watched with the Solar Blaze and the lone Knight of Evolution dealing 2,000 points of damage, I guess Solar Blaze is just not good against this deck, given how the creatures are lined up, which is rather humorous, I suppose. But this deck is, I'll call it straightforward insofar as it's an aggro deck. A little bit of removal in Heartless Act and Murderous Rider, but not a ton, because this is not a format that's really filled with creatures, given that Reclamation strategies don't have a ton of them. A couple copies of Duress in the main deck, which are good against those Reclamation strategies, and then just straightforward stuff. Some beatdowns, maybe not the creatures you expected, like Temoret Chosen from Death, but look, in order for this kind of deck to have one, it needed to evolve in a meaningful way. Cutting Rotting Regisaur, moving toward Hunted Nightmare, and all that stuff. It obviously worked where a lot of people weren't expecting this to be the case. So kudos to Kumagai on the deck construction, and kudos on the top 8. Looking forward to watching him play soon.
Yeah, and Kumagai here bringing this unusual list to our Players Tour final. Raph Levy, even though, you know, control decks, blue-white control has been around for a long time, it still can be considered a pretty odd choice for this tournament. Marshall, tell me more about Raph Levy's deck.
Yeah, very weird choice. You know, there were very few what you would call control decks in the field. It is not favorable against Temur Reclamation or any Reclamation strategies for that matter. So it's a really uphill fight. And on top of it, this is actually a Yorion build as well, playing 80 cards in the main deck to get the companion version of Yorion, which we haven't seen for a while since the companions rule change. So this is a much different deck. The thing that does give it a good shot here, though, especially in this particular matchup, is the fact that it actually skews towards the mid-range rather than the control end of the spectrum. When you look, it is doing a lot to affect the board. Oftentimes, its win condition is an Archon of Sun's Grace or a Yorion attacking in the air. These come down on turn 4 or turn 5, depending on what you're doing. And it does actually affect the board in a meaningful way with cards like Glass Casket to permanently remove small creatures and even Shatter the Sky to wipe the board, which, you know, you don't face down a lot of decks that have 3 main deck sweepers in standard right now, so that can give you that type of advantage. The other card that, of course, it takes advantage of is Elspeth Conquers Death, though in this particular matchup it has relatively few targets in comparison. You can tell that the deck was skewed towards Temur to do the best that it could, but that's a bit of an uphill climb either way. As a result, the deck was able to go 4-0 versus aggro decks over the course of the Swiss portion of the tournament, and that's probably bad news for Kumagai.
Yeah, Cedric, what do you think about Kumagai's chances here, and especially in a situation where he might fall behind, he's not able to do enough damage quickly enough? Does he have a way to close out the game, or is it just donezo?
Well, we're going to see any lone Knight of the Ebon Legions take it down. I find that to be rather unlikely, but stranger things have happened in our years of covering Magic, I suppose. I think this is tough, but I will say this. Here's where the slight advantage comes. Raph's playing an 80-card deck, so he might just draw the wrong cards. And under that premise, if I'm Kumagai, I'm just playing my stuff. I'm not playing around anything. And if you draw one of your 3 copies of Shatter the Sky with your 80-card deck, cool. I wasn't supposed to win anyway. And that's how, at least that's how I'm playing game 1. But I'm just, the way that I kind of learned around playing around against these Yorion decks is like, if you try to play around everything, you kind of like hamstring yourself, and then they don't have it and they get additional turns. It's like, just play your stuff, make them have it. And if they have it, you lose, and if they don't, then you win. And that's how I would play the game if I were Kumagai. The turns are going to be straightforward. Either Raph's going to have his removal or his counterspells, or he's not, right? And so just play your stuff. If it lines up well for Raph, cool, and if it doesn't, it could be a really fast win for Kumagai. So that's my approach. I don't know if that means it's favorable or not favorable, but just play your stuff and hope it's good enough. And I think that's all you can do.
All right, Marshall, I'm going to ask you to make a prediction here. Who do you think is going to win?
I like Raph's chances because of the fact that he does have main deck sweepers and removal spells that he can use. Now, what Cedric mentioned, though, was important. which is that the sideboard actually isn't as strong as you'd think, and it's also less potent given the 80 card deck. There's not as much in the board for aggro matchups that you might expect from a blue-white deck. It's heavily skewed towards beating Temur Reclamation and other Reclamation strategies, as you might imagine. I still think that Raph has the edge. I don't think that it's huge. He could easily just not draw those removal spells and get ran over, but I do think he has an advantage, and I would pick him.
All right, so Team Raph, what about you, Cedric?
I'm going to go with Raph. As much as I like a monocolor aggressive strategy and the fact that there's even main deck Duresses kind of hanging out here, I still think that Raph, the way that his deck is kind of constructed, even though it is 80 cards, it's very powerful deck against aggressive strategies. I understand that he was building his deck, and more importantly, Nassif was building the deck with the idea of beating Reclamation strategies, but he's also 4-0 against aggressive strategies because these decks are pretty good at beating aggressive strategies, and I think that's worth highlighting here. So I think it could be close, and I think that Kumagai should just play his stuff, and if he wins, the story is going to be Raph's just like, well, I guess I didn't draw Shadow of the Sky or Glass Casket or whatever, but I think Raph probably gets this one.
All right, so all of our quarterfinal matchups have been revealed, so it's time to welcome Paul Cheon back into the conversation here as we take a look at the entire bracket and discuss kind of these various quarterfinal matchups. So let's take a look at the whole bracket, ready to go, all of our quarterfinals. Once again, remember this is double elimination, and the grand finals is best 2 out of 3 matches, so a little bit of a unique twist here on our top 8. Cedric, looking at this bracket, overall, what are your thoughts?
Well, if I'm Michael Jacob, I'm happy with my first round pairing. I'm not happy with what comes out after that. I suppose if I'm him, I'd rather play against Kumagai than Levy, but I'm not thrilled about the potential future matchup on the other side of things. If I'm Ben White, I might feel if I can get by Larson, I got a good shot to make it to the finals of this thing. But my last thought here is that if Alan Wu is able to get by Michael Jacob, which admittedly I think is going to be very difficult, it's very hard to pick against him to win this tournament. I think he's the most talented player in this top 8. I think he's probably the most, between him and Raph, maybe the most accomplished player in the top 8, but Alan Wu, I think, is at the tippy top of his game right now. And if he can get by MJ, life is going to be pretty good for him. But remember also, it's a double elimination tournament, which means he doesn't have to get by Michael Jacob.
Yeah, Paul, taking a look at that, who would you say has the toughest time of it, and who is just going to cruise on through, if you had to guess?
Well, so as Cedric alluded to, I do believe Alan Wu is likely one of the best players in the top 8. However, he has, I think, the toughest matchup in the top 8 in that he has to go against Michael Jacob, who has a custom-tailored deck to beat Temur Reclamation, going 7-0 against it. So I think given that it's hard to pick Alan, I mean, you know, despite the talent, it's going to be hard to pick Alan. I think for me personally, Ben White probably has the best chance of winning the entire event because he does have a slightly favorable matchup game 1 in his first matchup, and then he's just going to see another Reclamation Mirror, and at that point, it's kind of a coin flip.
Marshall, something that stands out to me here, looking at our top 8 overall, half Reclamation decks, half other. For you, do you think, like, who figured it out? Was Temur or 4-color Reclamation the right choice to make for the tournament, or were the people who brought a rogue deck better seated, do you think?
I like the rogue decks. You know, for me, the name that jumps off the screen is Michael Jacob. I mean, he broke it, right? He's crushed all of the Reclamation decks over the course of the weekend. His deck was consistent, powerful, and came from a different angle, so they're not necessarily prepared. And yeah, there's a little bit of that worry from his side that maybe they'll have figured out a better way to play against his deck, but there's also the chance that they just aren't prepared for this type of strategy at all. And I love that he said, in a field full of people trying to attack a specific metagame, I'm going to next level that, and I'm just going to smash this metagame. And that's exactly what he did. I mean, this is an unknown quantity of a deck, and now he's in the top 8, and it looks like he's in a good position percentage-wise to take the whole thing down. To me, his name's the one that jumps off the screen.
Okay, so I'm going to hold everybody's feet to the fire here to make an overall prediction at who you think is going to win the whole tournament. Cedric, starting with you.
Raphael Levy, who I didn't mention the last thing I just talked. That's right. Here's what I think happens. I think he beats Mono Black. I think he plays against Michael Jacob in the top 4 and beats him again because he's still getting against aggressive strategies, and then he's got to get by some sort of Reclamation strategy in the finals, and he'll have a couple opportunities to do it. So, the old man, give me Raph. Give me Raph Levy.
All right, Paul, you're next up. Who's going to take the whole thing down?
So I think I see a similar path to the finals. I think Raph Levy is in a really good position to make it to the upper finals, given his matchups. However, I'm going to go with Ben Whites. I think Ben Whites has the best shot here because of his slightly favorable matchup in his first round. And Levy, as Cedric alluded to, needs to beat a Team of Reclamation deck. And during the course of the event, Raph Levy was 1-3-1 against Team of Reclamation. Now, his deck is very, very good against everything else, but not especially great against the best deck in the field.
All right, Marshall, it's your tune. Who's going to take it all down?
Michael Jacob. I mean, look, this guy sat down, said, I'm going to attack this metagame, and half of the top 8 are made up of the thing that he is best at beating. And I think if you look at the matchups with the other decks, it's not a disaster for him by any stretch. So I'll take that all day long. If he's absolutely smashing half of the top 8 and then has even a reasonable matchup versus the rest, I like his chances. So Michael Jacob for me.
All right, well, guess what? As host of the show, I also get to make a prediction, and I am going for Riku Kumagai and a mono black aggro, though I have to say I like MJ's chances too. I really like a deck that comes into a tournament and tries to break it and out metagame everybody else who is basically trying to cannibalize each other as they're sitting there with their various reclamation decks. So give me mono black aggro all day. I love the deck, and Riku seems like a great guy too. So he's my choice to take the whole thing down. I like this too, guys. We each picked somebody different, so we're gonna be really invested
I was the
here.
only person. I was the only person to choose a reclamation deck. Am I the bad guy, or what's going on?
You're the bad guy, and,
yes,
and I
Paul.
picked the same person that Frank Karsten picked. So you guys, there's room on the boat here if you want to jump in.
I bet he
right.
ran the numbers. All right.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. Please let us know, by the way, by heading into the chat or in the comments, who you think is going to take the whole thing down. And make sure you watch coming up tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/magic to find out who wins the whole thing, the Players Tour Finals, a really, really awesome, exciting tournament. Thank you all to Cedric, Paul, and Marshall for hanging out with me, the whole production crew, and of course, everybody watching at home. See you back here tomorrow.